speaking of offensive players, we have a few more that we really need to get into. Now, for these specific players, there's a dilemma when it comes to the franchise tag, right? Do the teams put the franchise tag on this guy? Do they tag him and keep him for a year? Do they tag him and trade him? Or do they get an extension done like the Cowboys just did with Javonte Williams? Now, we touched on Brees Hall. He is one of the players we are going to talk about in this segment specifically. But before we get to Brees Hall, I want to talk about the guy that I think is the most interesting in this segment. A guy who, again, if you play fantasy football, you understand completely what I'm about to say, has always been frustrating because the talent has always been evident, right? He's 6'6". He can run like a gazelle. He's the mitochondria. If you know ball, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But he is a guy who has not ever fully realized his full potential. He has shown glimpses here and there, but he's yet to put the full thing together. And this past year, I wouldn't say that he put the entire puzzle together, but a lot of the pieces started to click and the talent was evident and the production was there. And that's Kyle Pitts, for those of you who don't know who I'm talking about. He enters himself as the premier tight end on the market. This is a guy who I think is very interesting to have a conversation about what the Atlanta Falcons should do. And I'll pass it to you, Patrick, when I'm going to ask, like, if you were the Atlanta Falcons, if you were Matt Ryan and Ian Cunningham and all the talking heads in that building, what would be your course of action with Kyle Pitts? Are you trying to get an extension done? Are you tagging him? Are you tagging him, trading him? What's kind of your thought process when it comes to Kyle Pitts?
So here's the thing, and this has kind of been more of an issue with what the Falcons were setting up as opposed to Kyle Pitts as an individual. And I've had an issue with a lot of their recent draft classes because of how they kind of put themselves in this position. You can only pay so many guys, right? You drafted Drake London with the top 10 pick. You drafted Kyle Pitts with the top 10 pick. You drafted Bijan with the top 10 pick. You drafted Michael Penix with the top 10 pick. You are expecting Michael Penix to work out, right? Even though it's up in the air right now, you should be going forward expecting that to work out to a certain extent, right? Not to an extent where you let a guy like Bijan potentially walk, not to an extent where you let a guy like Drake London potentially walk. I would say it is to an extent where you let a guy like Kyle Pitts walk. I also think in the Kevin Stefanski offense, a slot tight end like Pitts, yeah, I don't think that really works well. I think Kyle Pitts can be a guy that would work very well with some other teams. Maybe they use him in more of that Harold Landry role. That is something I could see work. It's something we saw Stefanski experiment with last year. I think that's the only way I could really see Pitts working in a Stefanski style offense. But I do think Kyle Pitts is just a guy who needs to change of scenery. I really do. I think he's someone that, in order to get the most out of him, he needs to go to a team that might even try putting him at wide receiver. Just make him no longer a tight end because not a great blocker. He really is. And I think you're going to get the most out of him if you never ask him to put his hand in the dirt and just ask him to play wide out. I felt that way even when he was in Florida, right? Pitts, again, phenomenal player, phenomenal talent. We haven't seen that work with the Falcons. And I get it. He could be a fun tool for Kevin Stefanski, but so will Bijan, so will Drake London, and hopefully so will Michael Penix. We don't need to pay all four of those guys, right? I say you let Pitts walk. Or if you do really want to keep him and experiment with him, I say franchise tag.
So this is a situation with the Falcons with Michael Penix specifically where you kind of need it to work out, and if so, you have to budget for it to work out because if Michael Penix ends up being a superstar quarterback like you hoped he would be when you drafted him after paying Kirk Cousins, you're going to be paying $50+ million AAV for him in the near future. So this is a situation where, yeah, are you going to pay a wide receiver and a running back and a tight end and a quarterback? Like I don't know if you could do that. I will say I have always been not the president, not the CEO. I have been the emperor of the Kyle Pitts fan club. Okay, I have been the like probably his mother and then me are the tier list of Kyle Pitts fans on planet Earth, and I do believe in his talent. I believe that what I've seen, the glimpses I've seen, are real. Again, putting it together consistently has been the issue for him, but I truly believe if he tests his luck in free agency and he goes to a team like a Buffalo, not that they have the money to pay him, but I'm just throwing out like situations that would be great. Buffalo, Kansas City, you know, teams with really creative offensive play callers and really good quarterbacks. If he goes to one of those situations, dude, we're talking about one of the most unique and potentially one of the most dangerous weapons in the entire NFL. But is that team the Atlanta Falcons? I don't know. So I'm with you where I think franchise tag would be ideal. You get 1 year, you're paying him for in terms of 1 year AAV, top of the market, close to it, right? But you're not committed long term. You're not tied to the hip. If it doesn't work with Kevin Stefanski, if he doesn't utilize him kind of in that scat back, H back kind of role like Harold Fannin was last year, you're not on the hook for multiple years of paying him, 15, 16, 17, 20 million dollars, whatever it's going to be. So I'm with you. If I was the Falcons, I would franchise tag him. And then 2026 is are we thinking Kyle Pitts is going to be our future tight end? And again, maybe not. And then he hits the market next year and he's going to get a boatload of money. But I'm with you. I would probably franchise tag him. I would franchise tag him. I know you said either franchise tag him or let him walk. I would definitely franchise tag him. But that's kind of my 2 cents. But I really am a believer in the player. I think that the situation's probably not the best for him in Atlanta, but it could definitely work out somewhere else.
I would say I do think that there's an element to this one of if I'm Kyle Pitts, do I want to be a Falcon again? Like, if you really think there's an extra level of play here, maybe you think you'll get that by hitting the open market, potentially going to one of these other teams that might know how to use you a little bit better. Also, I think you just get paid more, right? Paid more by a team that might see you as the primary guy, right? Maybe I know I've thrown the Titans around a lot, but that's because they lead the NFL in cash space. Maybe a team like Tennessee sees you and says, you know what, you would be the top weapon on our offense. And Chigakonkwo, he's nice. He'll be our second tight end, but you'll be the top weapon. You'll be our guy on this offense. I mean, maybe you just look at Atlanta, see how many mouths there are to feed, and a run first offense with now a run first coach, and you say, you know what? I want to be somewhere else. And I think he'll get paid more to be somewhere else. So if I'm Kyle Pitts, I think I want to hit the open market more than I want to stay in Atlanta.
Yeah, if I'm Kyle Pitts, I certainly hope the Atlanta Falcons do not franchise tag me. But speaking of another player that might get franchise tagged, George Pickens. George Pickens, we mentioned it earlier, a Dallas Cowboys really good addition for them last year. They traded with the Pittsburgh Steelers for, I believe it was a fourth round pick, who then proceeded to trade a second round pick and $150 million for DK Metcalf, who was punching fans. But hey, that's beside the point. The Dallas Cowboys got in George Pickens, the player that everybody loved out of Georgia. The guy who everybody said first round talent, fell to the second round because of some character issues, because of some, he got in a lot of fights at Georgia as well. But this is a player in George Pickens who not only had a career year, not only had 1,500 yards and was, I'm not saying better for you, keyboard warriors out there, but was more productive than CeeDee Lamb last year, which is a world that I don't think any of us expected to live in. This is a guy who has an opportunity to get life-changing money right now. And the Dallas Cowboys are in a position similar to the Cincinnati Bengals years ago where it is, okay, we're paying our quarterback top of the market money. We're paying our wide receiver one top of the market money. Do we really want it? We are now paying our running back, middle of the road money. Are we now going to pay our wide receiver two in addition to all of those other guys? I don't know. I don't know if they are going to do that, but what I do know is that Jerry Jones treats the Dallas Cowboys not as a pro football team, but he treats them as a reality TV show. And I do think that this George Pickens saga will go on as long as it possibly can. I do not think there's going to be a quick resolution to this. I do not think, by the time we post this tomorrow, oh my God, George Pickens has a new contract. What I do think is going to happen, and what I think is the likeliest outcome, is that this drags out. The Cowboys threaten the franchise tag, and then maybe right before the franchise tag deadline, they sign a deal. But again, the Cowboys are a circus. They are that by design. I think that this goes down to the wire with the franchise tag. I think Jerry Jones threatens it. He might even put it on him. But eventually, George Pickens, I do think, will sign another deal with Dallas I do think that they are going to make him one of the highest paid receivers in the NFL. If Jerry Jones is anything, he is not void of entertainment. Like, he is a guy. He wants offense. Like, we know this. He wants offense. The interesting thing for me, though, and this is something that I think we should elaborate on, is if we assume that he does re-sign with Dallas, which you might disagree with me. Maybe that's a separate topic. How close is his contract to CD Lamb at $34 million AAV? Like, what is the dichotomy between the two? Because if he wants more than CD Lamb, I think that would cause a rapture within the Cowboys locker room. I think that would be some bad business on the personal and the financial side. So, what do you think the compromise is with George Pickens to, yes, I want to be one of the highest paid receivers, but also, we got a guy in CD Lamb who has paid his dues a lot more than you have.
Yeah, well, I brought up the cap numbers for all the teams right now. The Cowboys are 30th. They're 25 million over. Yeah, so on one
That's
hand, I was
after
thinking
that's
maybe
before the Javante deal or after?
that's after.
Oh, okay.
And there was a part of me that was thinking, hey, maybe they keep in mind it was with Javante. Like, we don't really know quite how the money's structured yet. Right now, that's still TBD. But I do think there was, before I checked that, a level of, oh yeah, it's probably going to happen. It's going to be tag, and then they wait very long, and then like 3 days before the season starts, he gets an extension. That's what I thought. Looking at this, I don't know if they can tag him. I really don't. And if they want to try, they're going to have to rework a lot of the money. They're definitely going to have to. I I think it's a really tough one. I really think all three possibilities are possible. I hate to kind of avoid the question, but I do think that there's a world where he hits free agency because of their money situation. I do think there's a world where we see him get tagged. I think there's a world where he gets tagged and traded, right? And then I also think that there's a world where we see him get that long term extension because they'll structure the money. They'll kind of backload the contract. Won't be a huge cap hit this year, will be a huge cap hit down the line. It could be one of those situations. I just know, again, looking at this situation, we'll get a clearer answer based off of how they restructure these other deals. I do think that's so important here. What should they do? Well, I mean, CeeDee Lamb is a heck of a receiver. They just paid Javante Williams. They're going to have to pay some great offensive linemen down the line. Dak Prescott's the highest paid quarterback in football. I say tag and trade. I do. I don't think it's right for them to keep all these guys around because how are you going to have money for the offensive side? You're not. You need assets for the offensive side. We heard some reports that the Cowboys are going to look to trade some star players. I think it starts with George Pickens. I do expect the tag and trade. I truly do look at it in that way.
Yeah, I think from a responsibility, team building, what's best for the organization, trade tagging and trading George Pickens does make the most sense because, really quick, you probably get a second at worst for George Pickens, I would imagine. Obviously, you would only have him 1 year of control, but I do think the Cowboys could get a second round pick, and then all of a sudden you think about the assets they acquired from the Micah Parsons trade plus another second round pick. We were just talking about them like, hey, you have a good draft. You hit the draft out of the park. You're a playoff team. Like, you are a potential NFC East champion here, and that would certainly help them. I'll say this when it comes to George Pickens. Their offense was really, 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 really good without George Pickens a couple years ago. Dak Prescott's a good quarterback. CeeDee Lamb is a phenomenal receiver. I think George Pickens for them is a luxury, not a necessity. And I think that's what it really comes down to when you're deliberating about George Pickens. It's like, are we a significantly worse football team without George Pickens? No, I don't think we are. That's really nothing to do with George Pickens. That's more to do with just the way the Cowboys are structured. If the Bengals could go back in time, maybe they are just so blinded. But if they can go back in time, I don't think they'd pay T. Higgins, and that has nothing to do with T. Higgins. T. Higgins is a great player. Just when you talk about team building, when you talk about philosophy, when you talk about distributing assets evenly, not putting all of your eggs in one bucket, I do think that George Pickens is in that range. And again, I do think a tag and trade makes sense, especially if you're going to get a second round pick or above for him. I do think that works. Another guy that is potentially going to either hit the open market or get tagged and traded is Brees Hall. We talked about him a decent amount in the Javonte Williams segment that we did, but this is a player in Brees Hall. I think he's very interesting because he has been in like the torture chamber for every year of his career. The Jets have had no consistent offense. They've had no consistent quarterback. They've had no consistent offensive line, even though I think it's actually getting some promise after the last year. Brees Hall represents that kind of age old adage of a running back who desperately needs a change of scenery. Desperately, desperately. And, there are some teams, Chiefs, who I think would be very interested to bring in a guy like him, a guy with his skill set, a guy with his explosivity, if that's a word. You go to Marist, you got to tell me if that's a word or not. They don't teach us. They didn't teach us that at Full
I
Sail University,
I
but
prefer explosiveness. I know for a
explosiveness.
fact that's a term.
Yeah, I'm gonna. While
I
you're
don't need
talking,
a
I'm gonna
degree
look
to
up if
know that one.
explosivity is a word. But Brees Hall to me represents a situation where if I'm the Jets, I really want him back. So as you can clearly tell, had some camera issues, right, guys? Love life, but if I'm the Jets, I do want him back. If I'm Brees Hall, I'm really like, please do not franchise tag me. Like, let me go and seek heaven. Let me escape the gates of hell, which is the New York Jets. And I would find it very difficult that the Jets don't do everything to bring him back. I mean, like, who are you spending money on? What player are you prioritizing over him? Do you think Braylon Allen coming off a season-ending injury is like a surefire bet to be your running back of the future? Unfortunately for Brees Hall, I don't see a world where they let him out of the building, but I do think that he would be a very intriguing option if he was on the open market. Unfortunately for Brees Hall, I also think he gets franchise tagged, which is the fate that so many running backs assume. But take me through kind of what you would do if you were on the Jets front office with Brees Hall. Would you try to extend him? Would you try to tag him? Would you tag and trade him? Like, what would you do with Brees Hall?
Well, I'll tell you what I would have done. I would have traded him during the season when the price was higher, when
Mm.
you could have gained something. Because you say, "Oh yeah, we need to keep him around." No, you don't. No, you don't. What are you winning games either way?
Well,
No,
he's their
you're
best
not.
player. I mean,
Is he?
yeah, who's better? Garrett Wilson, he had 400 yards last
Armand
year.
Membu, I think, is already a more valuable football player as a
More
rookie.
valuable because of positional versus like
Yeah,
positional
because of
value. Yes,
that,
but
but
you're not
that's a
paying
big
him. But
part
you're not
of
paying.
it.
So why not bring Brees Hall back?
How much did Ashton Genty do for the Raiders this year? He's a hell of a running back, but it doesn't matter. Brees Hall's a really good running back for right now. For right now, who knows how much more tread he has on the tires? The last thing the Jets need to do is make a commitment to something they're probably going to regret down the line. By the time they are truly competitive, there might not be much more Brees Hall left.
I don't know that
That's
they'll
the
be
reality
competitive
right
in
now.
3 years. I mean,
Yeah, and that's kind of why I look at it the way I do. I think, yeah, Braylon Allen, he's coming off a big injury. Isaiah Davis was pretty good. He was. Maybe you hope for the best with Braylon Allen, and if he's not, you rely on Isaiah Davis. You rely on Khalil Herbert, who I know as a Chicago Bears fan, not the most attractive name. Maybe you bring someone in free agency. Maybe you draft someone late in what I know is believed to be a weak running back class, but I see a pretty good offensive line. I honestly do. John Simpson, I like Oluf Fashanu as a
yeah,
young piece. I
Fashanu good. Yeah,
like Armand Membu. I just mentioned him. I think he's a stud. We'll see what they do with AVT. We'll talk about that later. They have a good offensive line there. I don't really care about who's behind it. Whatever running back is back there is going to be fine. Okay. Yeah, Brees Hall, he's a very good player. I don't think they should make a commitment like that. Maybe you try and tag him just so you could try and trade him, but I would rather just let the guy walk. I really would. And it's not like he wants to be there either way. What they should be prioritizing, what I think Aaron Glenn is prioritizing, is establishing a culture. And you don't establish a culture by having a hostage as your star player, right? And that's really what it is. And I'm sorry to the New York Jets, but this is what you are. You're a team where the stars would rather retire than play for you, in all honesty.
yeah,
So, yeah, I think you got to let him walk. You really do.
yeah. I think your point about you don't want your star player being a hostage. You're trying to build a culture that doesn't include any interceptions, but you're trying to build a culture. And I do think that there is some merit to the fact that Brees Hall clearly wants to be gone. Clearly, he was tweeting during the trade deadline. The guy, if it was his option, he would be, out there in the open market. So that point I think makes perfect sense. And again, like we are not expecting the Jets to be any good for 2 years minimum. Minimum. Like this is a multi-year. You traded Sauce Gardner, you traded Quinton Williams. You don't have a quarterback with any type of ability to play quarterback. Sorry, Justin Fields, but like this is a team that has so many holes in so many spots. I get it. I get it. At the same time, it's like, you know, I think that if you have a good player, you want to keep a good player. Probably they're only one of their only certifiable good players, solid Pro Bowl level players. But if you're telling me, hey, we are not keeping him, like this is he wants to be gone, we're going to respect his wishes. You certainly tag him, and then you certainly trade him. You get a fourth, third, whatever you were going to get. But again, if that was the plan, then I agree with you. It should have happened back in
Yeah.
November during the trade deadline.